The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Then they came to Capernaum, and on the Sabbath Jesus entered the synagogue and taught. The people were astonished at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority, not as the scribes. In their synagogue was a man with an unclean spirit. He cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." Jesus rebuked him and said, "Quiet, come out of him." The unclean spirit convulsed him, and with a loud cry came out of him. All were amazed and asked one another, "What is this? A new teaching with authority. He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." His fame spread everywhere throughout the whole region of Galilee. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
In our first reading from the book of Deuteronomy, the people have been complaining to Moses. They would do that quite often. They don't want God speaking to them anymore. It's too scary. When they encountered the Lord at Mount Sinai, and Moses would come down from the mountain bringing the 10 Commandments, that horrified them. And they said, "We don't want that anymore. We want some speaking to us for God, in God's place." So Moses says to the people, "A prophet like me. A prophet like me will the Lord your God raise up for you from among your kin. To him you shall listen. This is exactly what you requested the Lord your God at Horeb." In the early church, after Jesus ascended into heaven and the Pentecost came and church was reinterpreting and having a new understanding of Jewish scriptures that were very familiar to them. And this would have been one of them from Deuteronomy, "A prophet like me will the Lord your God raise up for you." We see this in the gospel. Mark writes, "Then they came to Capernaum." Jesus has gathered his first few disciples, and they are coming to stay in Capernaum. It's where Peter and Andrew live. They're going to stay with them. Not far from Peter's house, which is, the ruins of it are still there. If you visit Capernaum, it's a wonderful location, archaeological dig. Lots of things were very reminiscent of how it was in the day of Jesus. Not far from Peter's house is the synagogue that's spoken of in the gospel. Jesus entered the synagogue. The synagogue ruins that are there now come from the 4th century. It's called the White Synagogue. It's made out of bright white material. But underneath it, you can see under the floor of the White Synagogue is dark rock. It's the old synagogue. It's what they built the new one on in the 4th century. And you can see the step on which people would enter the synagogue. On that dark rock, on that step, is the step Jesus would have stepped on to enter the synagogue in this gospel account. And so Jesus comes into the synagogue and begins to teach. The people listening to him, the gospel writer says, were astonished at what he's saying. because he taught them as one with authority. He wasn't quoting anybody. He wasn't doing research like the scribes would, and quoting this person or that person. But Jesus is speaking to them directly with authority. And the early church thought of that incident in Capernaum and said, wait a minute, that's just like Deuteronomy. That's what was being spoken of there. Moses said, a prophet like me will the Lord your God raise up for you. He said, that's Jesus. Jesus is the new prophet. It was many years later, 1,200, 1,400 years after the event in Deuteronomy. Here comes Jesus entering the synagogue and teaching with authority. The early church writers will look on him as the new Moses. Many times when Jesus is speaking to the crowds, he goes up on a mountain. People said, wait, that reminds us of Moses going up on the mountain. But he teaches them with authority. In the synagogue was a man with an unclean spirit. He cried out, what have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? The Greek for that sentence, what have you to do with us, is the amen kai soi. Amen kai soi, what, us, and you. What has that got to do with us and you? Now, in the English, that wouldn't remind us of much. But the pattern of this sentence in Greek sounds very familiar. Amen kai soi. It takes us back to the Gospel of John chapter 2, the wedding feast at Cana. The wedding party has run out of wine, and Mary's going to intervene so that the groom is not embarrassed. And so she goes to Jesus and says to him, they have no wine. What does Jesus say back to his mother? Tia moi kai soi, what's that got to do with me and you? Wow, they're almost the same words as that man in the synagogue said to Jesus. What has that got to do with me and you? And then we hear, of course, in the gospel that Jesus heals the man, unclean spirit, convulses him, and goes away. And again, the people are amazed. Up earlier, they are astonished at his teaching. Now they're amazed at his healing. What is this? A new teaching with authority that keeps coming up over and over again. And the sign of that new teaching is even the unclean spirits obey him. We are called to listen to Jesus in our day. Listen to Jesus in the gospel. What is it that Jesus teaches us? As Christians, we should all be familiar with those four gospels. Very familiar with the teachings. What is it that Jesus says to us? It's important that we listen to him as someone with authority. He's just not offering us his opinion. This is what Jesus thinks. No, Jesus is teaching with authority. He's the one that stands in the place of God, which is what the people asked Moses for, and is teaching the people with authority and authenticity. And so we're called to listen to him as a person of authority, not just another talking head on TV. These days, there's all kinds of stuff coming at us. This person has that opinion, and that person has that opinion, and people say that, and other people say that. That's just the television. Then we have the radio, and we have the paper, and people, everybody's got an opinion about something. They often talk about it with great passion. But it's important that every time we hear an opinion from anybody, we compare it to the teaching of Jesus. Is the Jesus teaching is different than all the others. It's a teaching from God. It's a teaching from God regarding our neighbor, regarding our relationship to God, our relationship with one another. We're called to listen, and what that person said, what would Jesus think of that? What would Jesus say about what that person just proclaimed? Would he agree with it or not? And so it's important that we listen to people, those opinionators, with a critical mind. Critical in the sense that always compare it to the teachings of Jesus Christ. That's what we're called to do as Christians. You just don't take one thing and another thing and another thing. You just walk around confused if we do that. Because one person is just not like another. That person said that, okay, and then that person said that, okay. It's not the same. Depends on what they're saying. We don't listen to the people because we like them. We listen to the people to what they're telling us. And if what they're telling us is consistent with the teachings of Jesus Christ, great. But if not, if what they're saying is against the gospel, don't listen to them. Discount it. Shut it out. Shut off the TV. Do not listen to that because they're violating the teaching of the gospel. What would Jesus say in that situation? Would he say that? And if not, ignore it. Don't just absorb things as if it's all the same, as if one person's opinion is as good as the next one, because they're not. It's all weighed in the balance in the teachings of Jesus Christ. Is that a teaching of Jesus? Is that consistent with the Beatitudes? Is that consistent with the Ten Commandments? Is that consistent with the teachings of Jesus about the poor, the downtrodden? And if not, ignore it. Ignore it. It's not the same. So as Christians, we're called to use our ability to discern in a positive way and to weigh a statement that we hear, whether on TV or the radio or even personally with someone else in conversation. How does that compare to what Jesus taught? Because what Jesus taught is what we accept. It's what we believe, because Jesus teaches with authority.